and we had started receiving the documents from the leak. I was responsible for processing them. At the same time, my mother, literally on the other side of the world, because I was in Central America at the time, was investigating corruption in Malta. In particular, an energy deal to convert Malta's power supply to gas power. When I was investigating this leak as part of my job, I realized that Malta's energy minister, as well as the Prime Minister's chief of staff, held companies in Panama that they hadn't declared. My mom, as soon as the Panama Papers were published, began investigating using her own sources. And she uncovered a lot more than what we had uncovered at ICIJ. But because she was the only person, the only journalist in the country who was consistently reporting on the matter, she was targeted. And what we didn't realize at the time is that the authorities had all been neutralized. The police, the judiciary, the prosecutor, no one was doing their job. All of these authorities that we imagined would be investigating weren't. And therefore no charges were going to be brought. So my mom was completely isolated. First, the officials in question filed multiple defamation cases against her, abusing Malta's very loose defamation law. And when that didn't work, the people involved resorted to murdering her. That was in 2017. Just over a year after the publication of the Panama Papers. And 3 years later, the anniversary is in a week, in fact, we're still fighting for justice.
Maybe Laura, could you tell me your first question and I will tell so Matthew can hear it as well?
You can hear me directly?
Yes.
Or not?
No, but I can hear you and then I will tell him the question, yes.
Yes, I wanted to speak about, from a law perspective, about the European Charter for Fundamental Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights, specifically about Article 10, protecting the freedom of press. And I wanted to ask him his view on his article and on this article and its enforcement, and his view on the European Union and the Council of Europe in the protection of the freedom of press.
Yes, so the question of Laura is about the Article 10 of ECHR, which is the freedom of press. So concretely, the European Court of Human Rights, and of course the European Union is pushing a lot for the freedom of press. What is his point of view maybe concerning it, and how, let's say, the international organization could help to have more freedom, especially on Malta?
There's a really broad case to be made on Article 10 grounds. The thing is that case law around this article creates a positive obligation for the state to create an environment that fosters free expression, that allows free expression, and where people who want to express themselves feel free and are free to do so without fear of there being any reprisals. So the government in Malta blatantly did the opposite. Government officials filed vexatious defamation lawsuits against my mother. The Prime Minister's official spokesperson ran a blog dedicated to attacking my mother with 600 posts a year. Parliamentarians would make speeches demonizing my mother. It was just one thing after another. And this is one of the reasons why we pushed so hard for the setup of the public inquiry. Because we wanted the Board of Inquiry to look at the environment that had been created in Malta, where people were afraid to speak out, really, very broadly speaking, an Article 10 failing in Malta, where Malta has failed to comply with its obligations under that article, and still does, in my opinion.
Now, maybe Jessica, could you give your question?
Hi. Hi, Matthew. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yeah.
Hi. So I'm sorry that I have to join this way, but I don't know what's wrong. I'm appearing on the chat, I can see, but not through my computer. So thanks to technology, Laura has connected here through FaceTime. Matthew, we've heard so much about the Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation. Could you tell us more about it and how the public can support the foundation? Because we would love to help.
Yes, so the question from Jessica is there in Malta they hear so much about, of course, the foundation, and they would like to know, I mean, especially Jessica, how the public could support actually the foundation.
I mean, the most difficult thing for us has been to encourage people to come forward. The progress in this case has rested and will continue to rest on sources coming forward, people who know too much or who know bits and pieces of evidence of crimes. This will really help us move things forward. It's extremely difficult because of this atmosphere that has been created in Malta, where people are not just afraid to speak out publicly, they're even afraid to talk to journalists. This is really, it's just a sign of a society that's dominated by fear. And my experience of living in other countries that are functioning democracies is that people don't live with as much fear as they do in Malta. They're not afraid of talking to journalists, they're not afraid of speaking out. But here almost everyone is. And that has made our work really, really hard. Sometimes you feel like progress is impossible. And I mean progress not just in terms of moving the country forward, but even moving the single case forward. But of course, this is what organized crime does. It creates an atmosphere of fear.
I have a question as well. I've been in Malta last year for the first time in December myself, and totally by chance there was a demonstration just in front of my hotel at the entrance of Valletta, and my question that I had in mind at that time was, could you tell us when actually, according to you and your mother, maybe such a situation of corruption maybe started in Malta, if it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because we don't know very well, of course, politics in Malta from outside of the country.
I mean, this country has always had this cultural problem where people are afraid to speak out or don't want to tread on another person's toes, even though they know that that person has done wrong. What's changed, I think, over the past maybe 8 to 10 years is that people began to fear reprisals not just from other individuals, but from the entire government. So, because Malta is centrally controlled, almost all power is vested in the Prime Minister, who's kind of like an elected monarch. The entire force of the government can be used to strike at citizens who do wrong, let's say, to the Prime Minister or to the governing party. And this is obviously something that people fear more than a reprisal from an individual. If I report a criminal offense by someone in the street, maybe at worst in Malta, that person will try to slander me in public or something like that. But the thing is, with the governing party, they would use all their powers to go after you. So government officials would file libels, and let's say their lawyers using government funds, even though they're private cases, then use the tax authorities to conduct vexatious tax investigations against you. Then use sort of, for example, relatives have jobs in government that make their lives impossible. Your company depends on deals with other companies, for example. The government will tell those other companies, look, we're not going to work with you because you do business with this person. Things like that just try to run you into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what was being done to my mother. My mother receives most of her income not from journalism, but from a magazine that she published about design, architecture, and food. Absolutely nothing to do with her daily journalistic work. But the governing officials try to go after that business to try to shut her down in that way. My brother used to work as a diplomat. He was recalled from his diplomatic posting a few months before my mother was president. Things like this. And it's the same modus operandi in other states, in all states that are sliding towards dictatorship. The Philippines, I mean, you see the same thing being done to Maria Ressa, for example.
Okay. Laura?
I can bring a question
Yes.
from Vargas. Thank you.
So
Dr.
there is a question from the audience, yeah?
Yeah. So in your view, what is the impact of all the events like the Panama Papers revelations, the assassination of your mother, to the establishment of the rule of law in Malta and the EU?
So the question from actually a colleague is what is the impact of course, the revelation of the Panama Paper and as well the assassination of your mother concerning simply the rule of law in Malta?
I'm not sure if I understood the question well, but the synthesis of it is that if in 2016, when the Panama Papers were published, the authorities in Malta had taken action immediately, then my mother wouldn't have been assassinated, because the people who assassinated my mother knew that, or thought that if they got rid of her, all their problems would be solved, because they had every single authority in their pockets. The only problem for them was my mom. Therefore, we can only conclude logically from this that if the police had investigated, if the Attorney General had prosecuted, then we wouldn't be in this situation. Because the people who murdered my mother would have to murder the police, the prosecutor, the judges, the magistrates, which is impossible. None of those people were doing their job, so in their eyes, they only have to get rid of my mother.
And do you think that something changed now with regards to judicial impartiality and independence and in the government?
Do you think something have changed since then? I mean, in Malta, for example, concerning the impartiality in the procedures and as well on the side of the government since 2018?
Now we have a prosecutor. So previously, it was the police that prosecuted in Malta. It was a very strange system. And our Attorney General was the government's lawyer. Now, because of all the campaigning that we did, my brothers and I, after my mom's murder, the Council of Europe reviewed Malta's institutions and its constitutional setup. This was done by a body called the Venice Commission. And it recommended precisely this change. So now we have an Attorney General and a State Advocate. The Attorney General is now responsible for prosecutions, and that's a role which is independent, statutorily independent. The Attorney General can't be removed by the Prime Minister in the same way they could be removed before. Still, we have the same situation we had before, which is that Malta's laws against corruption and money laundering are very good on paper, but in practice, because of our culture, lack of know-how, lack of political will, prosecutions don't actually take place. So previously, the Attorney General did have the power to prosecute money laundering cases independently of the police. But this never happened because of what we call state capture, which is when a criminal organization takes control of the state and of all of its authorities and bodies, even the ones that are supposed to be autonomous and independent. So our campaign is, yes, for Malta's systems of checks and balances to be improved, and that would be a root and branch improvement, but also for all of the people who formed a part of this or who still form a part of this criminal organization to be removed from any position that they might be in where they are capable of exerting influence over these authorities.
Question maybe from Jessica?
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, do you have a question? Yeah?
Yes, you can hear me. As I asked, I'm not sure if the public can. What I wanted to ask Matthew also, and how can we promote the foundation's work, and also how do journalists feel today? Because the statistics that Laura mentioned at the start, Laura, am I right? You said 1,400.
Yeah, 1,400 journalists murdered since 1992.
That is an unbelievable figure, and I can't believe it. And we're in the year 2020. How do you feel, Matthew, today? And how do your colleagues? Do you feel safe? I know that you're extremely courageous and that you will persist and go on for this fight for justice and to end impunity. But how can we help you? How can the public continue? People like us, I suppose, the people who are, and how can we encourage people not to be so scared and to speak up and to come forward to the foundation to help journalists as much as possible? What are your feelings?
So the question from Jessica is, of course, the Maltese population, like her, the public would like to help, because of course there are some statistics which are very scary, like 1,400 journalists who got killed around the world since 1992. And obviously, concerning your mother, it happens very rarely in Europe, in the European Union. There was one, I think, as well in Slovakia. But in general, how the Maltese population could help. So for the media, it will be, I would say, less fear, especially in Malta for journalism.
And not only the Maltese, in general.
In general, yeah.
I would. There are many ways in which people can help. There are sort of the indirect and the direct ways.
Mm-hmm.
Direct ways, when people know something, it helps us when they come forward. I mean, for example, if they're a witness to a particular bribery transaction, for example, then it helps when they come forward with that evidence. indirect ways for people to participate in their democracy, and I mean that in a broad sense, by, for example, supporting media organizations that publish investigative journalism, by paying a subscription, for example, by engaging in public discourse regarding corruption, which is really, I think, one of the defining topics, not just of Malta now, not just for Malta now, but for the world now. By not giving in to bullying campaigns by politicians, by not buying into propaganda. If you're a lawyer or want to practice law, by dedicating yourself to public service, for example, working on prosecutions, this kind of thing. This would really help our society move forward. But as I said, on this case in particular, the thing that helps us the most is when people come forward with evidence. That could mean a giant breakthrough for us.
Okay.
And of course, why is this case so important? Because impunity breeds impunity, and if we are able to get convictions in this case of my mother's murder, then we'll be creating a really powerful deterrent effect that hopefully prevents other murders from being committed.
Question from Laura, yes?
Yes, on that note, I saw that there is a recently established Office of a European Prosecutor to prosecute cases of money laundering and corruption in the European Union. I was wondering about his view on that and whether the foundation is going to contact the office and whether it could help in his view.
Yes, so the question from Laura is about the new office of prosecutor, European prosecutor, which has been in place recently. And do you think the Daphne Foundation or yourself, for example, would like to work with them in order to?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question.
Yes.
Could you repeat it?
Yes. So the question is about the new office of prosecutor at the European level, the new European prosecutor, who just got established. Yes, exactly. Is there a plan or a project maybe that the Daphne Foundation would work in order maybe to reveal some money laundering problems or corruption situation, not only in Malta but in general in Europe with that new office?
We would always do that. I mean, the organization, the foundation, the foundation, every time it discovers evidence of crimes that have taken place, we generally engage the police and prosecutors, and of course with the EPPO, we'll be doing that with them. Now, the issue for Malta is that there isn't the right skill base for the EPPO here, so we have a prosecutor at the EPPO level, but Malta is missing delegated prosecutors.
Question on my side is concerning more, how can I say, your activity as a journalist, because of course I can imagine that you got inspired to become journalist as well from your mother.
Sorry, hold on, because I can't hear you properly. Can you start
Yes.
from the beginning?
Yes, sure. Yes, my question is your career as a journalist. How did it start? And was it by the inspiration of your mother, or as well where
Sorry,
you?
can you repeat, please, because I couldn't hear.
Yes,
again.
yes. Your career as a journalist, how did it start? Did it start because of the work of your mother, or you got interested in some cases you wanted to investigate? How did it start?
I mean, my mom started out as a journalist, I think, when I was about 2 years old.
Mhm.
So growing up, it was the only thing I knew, really. I mean, for me, these things were normal, that journalists would be harassed and so on. It was only when I left Malta afterwards that I realized how abnormal this is. But of course, growing up in that world and seeing how effective my mother was in changing her society, I grew up wanting to do the same thing. And I had a really strong interest in media, even though I had no wish to ever work as a reporter. But afterwards, I realized I could mix my chosen career, which was software engineering, with journalism. This was around the time that data journalism was kind of being invented. And that's what I ended up doing, in fact, mixing those two things.
Okay.
Which is how I ended up working on the Panama Papers.
Do you have a question, maybe, Laura?
Yes, I was wondering if you could update us on the development of the judicial proceedings that the foundation is involved in.
Yes, could you maybe update the audience about the latest developments in the judicial proceedings that the foundation is involved currently?
Oh my God, there are new judicial proceedings every day. I don't know where to start. So, I guess the first one we were involved in was literally the day of the murder, when we had to file a case for the magistrate who was appointed to oversee the investigation to recuse herself, because she was someone that my mother had to investigate. And ever since then, it's just been one thing after another. One major development was in December 2017, just under 2 months after the murder, when the hitmen were arrested. And we were involved in that case immediately. Because being family to the victim gives us that right. Following that, we had this campaign that was almost 2 years long for a public inquiry into the circumstances surrounding the murder to be started. And as soon as that started in December 2019, we were involved in that. But just a few weeks, we became involved in that, and that's still ongoing. It's become a bit like Malta's Truth and Justice Commission, because it's uncovering everything that made the murder possible. Corruption, state capture, the anti-free speech environment that the government had created, and so on. When the suspected mastermind, Jürgen Fenech, was arrested in November 2019, we then also became involved in the case against him. And because there are issues with the way prosecutions work in Malta, we have to do a lot of work to bring evidence into that case ourselves. So that's a full-time job, really. It's a large part of what the foundation spends its time on. The thing is, if we weren't doing that, then the case would suffer tremendously, which I think says a lot about why there's impunity in many cases when journalists are murdered. Because unless the family is heavily involved, then the likelihood is that there isn't going to be justice. But the reality is that in the majority of the cases, let's say 95%, the family of the victim is not involved. Either through fear of reprisal, further reprisal, or because the journalist doesn't have family, or because the family members themselves are also murdered, and so on.
Another question, Laura? Yes?
Maybe if it's not too delicate, we could ask him if he himself ever has fear of reprisals, or anyone in his family, and how's the foundation dealing with that?
Yes, so the question is concerning, of course, your security as well. Now that, of course, you continue to do the investigation, did you or let's say your collaborators who have been afraid lately, maybe, of anything which indeed could endanger your work lately? I mean, not 3 years ago.
I mean, there's always something. The thing is that the people were fighting against the one very violent and two have a lot of money. So they can use means that are, I mean, directly violent, for example, the car bomb, and also indirectly, for example, they could launch a cyber attack against us, or, I mean, slander members of my family, or conduct a sort of defamation campaign against my mom, or attack other people who are supporting the campaign. Very early on, this was really bad. Right at the beginning of the campaign, anyone who spoke up in support of my mother, of justice for my mother, was attacked, abused, harassed by people who weren't anonymous trolls. They were people who were using their real identities on Facebook and Twitter, and so on, and some of them were even government officials. So it's as though there was impunity for the murder, and also impunity for the people who tried to cover up the murder, or who attacked people who were calling for justice. There were all these multiple layers.
Question maybe, Jessica?
When I hear Matthew speak, what he says is so true, and it's such a pity that we live in a world and us in a country where it's so easy for powerful people to take over and for justice not to take its course. And it is only thanks to the hard work of people like Matthew and his family and all the people who are supporting the foundation, who have helped with the recent findings, and that is how, and thanks to the public inquiry now, we've seen a huge development in the case. So, as Matthew said before that, really, I think was what was there before, Matthew? Really, did you mentioned last time that the file was practically empty, and all the research and the things you were looking into only came about recently, 3 years later, right?
Yes. So the question from is as well a comment, because Jessica is from Malta and she wants to show how much, of course, Maltese population is grateful actually, because before the work you have done and the work of your mother, the inquiries files were pretty empty, and thanks to your work, of course, suddenly the evidence came, and as well, Jessica wants to ask if it was just 3 years that suddenly the authorities started to get into this.
If it was what? Sorry, that the authorities...
Yeah, if it was only 3 years ago that they started seriously to let's say, collect evidence and make investigation in Malta.
I mean, I would say that it was even less than 3 years ago. One of the most shocking things that I experienced was when my family had been given access to the police file on the Panama Papers investigation, because that was submitted to the, I mean, it was obtained by the Board of Inquiry in the public inquiry. And when I opened that police file, I was shocked beyond belief, because the file contained almost nothing except a sort of paper trail of excuses for why the investigation shouldn't be pursued. And this continued right up until 2019. So it was only when Malta was sort of put under the money van lens did things start to change. And unfortunately, that really shows you how often in cases like this, it's not sort of persuading people to do the right thing that works, although of course that should be done, but using economic pressure or the threat of economic sanctions, which actually gets results in the end. Because it was only when Malta began starting to feel that heat, that it might potentially be grey-listed by the FATF, that it really started beginning to change things.
Okay.
Manival told Malta, look, there's one thing we want, and it's prosecution for these cases and others like them. So then the government had to deliver. It became a sort of do-or-die issue for the government.
I have a follow-up question concerning indeed Malta and the European Union, because for an outsider, Malta being such let's say small member state, do you think there is maybe a frustration to not see the European Union, European Commission, European Parliament, really maybe putting pressure maybe on the government in Malta, to think about putting on conditions so that there is a transparency, etc., the possibility to get subsidies, etc. So is there a kind of frustration in Malta to not see the European Union more active in putting pressure on the government?
I mean, there has been a change at the Commission level. Under the previous President Juncker, things were really bad. And I think the sort of light touch approach of that Commission has led us to the situation that we're in now. Things are a bit different, I think, they're changing. Commission. The rule of law report was a really good sign, but of course now we need follow-up to make sure that these issues are addressed.
Question, Laura?
Sorry, but I mean something to add to that.
Yes.
Of course, after the Panama Papers were published, it was incredibly frustrating that we have published this hard evidence of corruption, implicating the Prime Minister's closest minister and his chief of staff. And these people would be welcomed within the Commission. So it was incredibly frustrating seeing that. We had been let down by the very institutions that we had campaigned for Malta to join. Because my mother had campaigned for Malta to join the European Union in 2003. Luckily, I think, or rather, I think, thanks to the campaign mounted by Press Freedom Organization, members of the European Parliament and others, the attitude has started to change.
Okay. Yes, Laura?
Yes, I just wanted to say that today or in the next few days, there is going to be a European Charter for Freedom of Press presented to the President of the European Parliament. And I was wondering what is his hope for the future and his advice for us younger generations of lawyers, of advocates, of journalists, anything. And what are his views, what we can do, his hopes.
So today it has been mentioned that there will be a presentation of a European Charter of Freedom of Press to the President of the European Commission. And of course, now the question is, what is your hope for the future in terms of freedom of journalism or freedom of press, and especially for the young journalists who would like to invest their career into investigation, for example?
Oh my God, I have so many hopes. So I guess the first one and the most important one is that journalists wouldn't carry so much weight So we are really overwhelmed with all the evidence of corruption that reaches us every day. And by we, I mean journalists all over. In Tokyo, Johannesburg, Bogota, wherever. We're just completely ignorant. And I think we're much of that sort of responsibility on our shoulders, which is why I guess journalists are bearing the brunt of it. I mean, the second thing is, I guess, that journalists continue, or rather, I guess the skills that journalists have continued developing in the way that they've been developing over the past 10 years. So the things that young journalists are capable of now really impress me. And I think journalism has really come a long way from sort of what my mom's initial experience of the profession was in the 1980s up until this point. Journalists now work with open sources of data, closed sources of data. They have massive networks that cover the entire globe. If I'm investigating a corruption story that leads to Liberia, for example, I have an entire network that I can call upon to help me with that. That.
Mm-hmm. My last question on my side is concerning indeed the status of journalists when we see in the news what's happening in Belarus, for example, what's happening as well when politicians in the United States they started to talk about fake news concerning the large networks. So what do you think about could be done in order to protect wait, I think it disconnected. I'm calling him again.
And in the meantime, if I can encourage the audience to ask questions in the chat box, I will publish them and pass them to Matthew.
Hi.
Yes, sorry for the disconnection.
No, it's okay.
Yes, my question was concerning the status of the journalism, and especially when we hear about what's happening in Belarus and the difficulty for the journalists to provide information, of course, outside, but as well when politicians use the term of fake news. So what do you think could be done in terms of maybe legislation or reforms concerning the status of the journalist and as well how they can, let's say, use their source in total freedom, etc. So in some countries, in order to indeed protect their work in a way that people will not use the terms of fake news for people actually really investigate, etc.
I mean, the fact that we continue, I mean, within the human rights committees of the United Nations and within the European Parliament and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe continue to pass resolutions that improve the protections for journalists really help. But I think Belarus is in a situation where journalists there are doing everything they can do, and they're doing what they should be doing in that situation, which is documenting abuses. Because unless we have that evidence of those crimes that have been committed, of that abuse, of that harassment, and so on, of those human rights violations, then we won't be able to do anything about them afterwards. So journalists, they are really doing the core of their job, which is to document what's happening.
Laura?
Maybe Jessica has a question? One last question on your side?
Mm-hmm.
I can't hear you.
maybe a question from Jessica.
I can't hear you.
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. Matt, can you hear Matthew well? Because I hear him slightly distant now this time round. So I don't know if the voice is good.
Yes, we hear you, Jessica, yes.
Okay, what I wanted to clarify before, Aurelien, because I wasn't sure, I think the message didn't come through, but what I meant was thanks to the work that Matthew and the foundation have done, they've brought so much evidence forward that the last 2.5, the information collected over the last 2.5 years was practically nothing, and it is what was only at the end of 2019 and now during 2020 that with the support of the foundation and all the evidence brought forward by Matthew and the Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation, suddenly we've seen an influx of information appearing, and as Matthew said, sadly the police file, which had been practically empty, was suddenly filled with information thanks to the evidence brought forward. What I wish is that going forward, and now that things are looking more positive, we will see more progress, and we hope that this case is an example for the future, so that another crime like this will not be treated the way this one was. And hopefully we are trying to limit the element of corruption interfering in justice being served, because this is the big pity. Wherever you turn, even if it's a high institution like Europe and you are looking at the European Union, it is so sad that we are living in a world where corruption is overtaking everything. So we will continue fighting, and Matthew, we encourage you to continue your hard work, and that is why I really wanted to promote the foundation and for us to continue supporting you and to let the public know about the foundation and the work of journalists that goes on behind the scenes, so that together we can continue fighting against corruption and for justice to be served where it needs to be.
So the question from Jessica is, since the last few years, but especially this year, 2019, 2020, she noticed that there was a lot more information, of course, on what's happening in Malta in terms of investigation. On the side of the population, there was more information, and her question is to you to know if, of course, hoping that it will not happen anymore what happened 2 years ago, in terms of how the police, how everything was treated. How do you think that you will continue to do your fight on the long term and to improve? Because of course population has a lot of hope in your work, and that of course it continues to improve the situation in the country. So the question from Jessica is, yes, if you will continue for many years in order to help on this aspect.
The answer is yes. I think we have no choice in more than one sense. One, because judicial proceedings in Malta are extremely slow. So we're not going to see a judgment in the case against Jürgen Fenech and the Hitman probably for years to come. And the second reason is that I simply don't want my mother to have died in vain. If she was murdered for this and everything in Malta continued as it was before and nothing changed, then it would have been a pointless death. So, to me, the work of the foundation is turning that around to make sure that my mother actually died for something, and not so that everything would continue as it always did over here. We want to change the country completely.
And my follow-up question is, do you know maybe how many years it would take before there will be maybe a new generation of politicians?
I really look to it some people might laugh at this, but I look to Sicily as an example of how it is possible to change the culture, because I think that through the cases against because of the prosecutions against members of the mafia, changes in the law in Italy to allow criminal organizations to be prosecuted as a whole. I think this has really changed the culture there, and a lot of NGOs operating at a local level have sort of engaged young people and in sort of bringing up a new generation of people that are against organized crime and against corruption. But of course, this takes one generation or two generations. So we're really in it for the long haul. It's definitely going to take at least one generation, I think, for the culture to change. Because an entire generation of people, my generation and maybe the one below it, have grown up thinking that corruption is normal, and that it's normal to have no distinction between political party and government, for example. We want to show people that this isn't normal, and we want to bring up a new generation of people that recognize that this isn't normal. But it's going to take like 30 years, 40 years to change that culture.
Yes?
Bring a question from the audience.
Yeah.
So a question from Andreas. Can we rely on established media and expect them to work seriously on investigative journalism? Or maybe society needs alternative types of news organizations? Do you have good and bad example of existing media outlets with respect to real, revealing investigative journalism?
Yeah. So the question from someone watching is concerning the mainstream media, or let's say in general journalism. Do you think there would be at some point some alternative if, for example, indeed the population might not believe in what they see on TV, etc., or you think that actually there would be a transformation maybe of the current mainstream medias into a bit more investigation?
I mean, of course, the thing is that historically investigative journalism has been very expensive. What I was working on doing at ICIJ and what I hope to continue at the foundation is to lower the cost of investigative journalism by improving technology so that we can make investigative work more efficient, easier, sort of lower the threshold, and this will make it more commonplace, and sort of just empty reporting, I hope, or sort of less important reporting will perhaps be replaced with more crucial investigative work. But it's really important that a proper or that the right tone is set by our political leaders. So if our political leaders begin disparaging the press, begin using terms like fake news and so on, this sets the tone for the entire society. It means that people lose trust in the media, not because the media have necessarily done anything wrong, but simply because people are told to hate journalists and hate the media.
Last question? No?
No, I think I can just comment on what he was saying, that he hopes that his mother did not die in vain. And I just wanted to tell him that I think that the impact of his mother's work and his work, the foundation's work, on the international community as a whole, I think the European community, the Maltese community, the new generation of human rights advocates, young lawyers and journalists. I mean, the impact has been already a lot, very big, and I think it will continue to grow. I'm sure it will continue to grow.
So Laura, with a student, an advanced student and as well intern at the ICC, she just said that the work that you have done with your mother is extremely big already and has a huge impact for, of course, the international community, knowing as well how it would maybe change, I hope very soon, the Maltese politics, but in general, because that obviously happens as well in other countries. I mean, investigation which reveal sometimes corruption for governments. That helps a lot for the students, especially for Laura, for example, to see hope indeed for the next generation to continue, of course, to help your work. And this is our comment, actually. It was not a question here.
Okay, thank you. I mean, like I said, we're around sort of in the long term. And of course, we hope that the lessons learned in Malta can be applied in other member states.
Yes. So many thanks again for joining for this interview, which was difficult technically.
Maybe
yes?
if we have time from the audience.
Yes, but still, I'm glad we worked out a solution.
Yes, Laura?
And I thank everyone for being patient.
One question quickly from the audience.
Last question apparently from the audience, the very last one. Yes?
Okay.
Sorry. So Dr. Folders says that surveys show that at least in some EU countries, members of the general public are increasingly supporting investigative journalism. What could the EU do to capitalize on this public support and enhance the role of investigative journalism in promoting the rule of law?
Yeah. So a question from a colleague actually who is watching said that there is increased support from the public actually in many countries. I know from where country she is, for example, in Hungary, to have more investigative journalism. So what do you think the European Union should do in order to simply, so continue that effort on the side of the population, which ask to have more investigation and investigative journalism?
What could the Commission do? I mean, one of the most important campaigns that we're engaged in at the European level is for there to be a directive to change defamation law across the European Union. So it's currently very easy in most member states of the EU to file vexatious lawsuits against journalists who reported on your doings if you're a public figure. We want this to be changed. I mean, this happens in Malta. Politicians use libel defamation suits to freeze a bank account, file 19 libel suits at one go, and things like that. This is happening in other countries too. Newspapers in Poland, Croatia, Slovenia, Italy, journalists everywhere are being sued vexatiously. And with no proper legal standing, the lawsuits are filed just to create problems for the journalists and to suck up their time. Not because the person filing them thinks they have any hope of winning. We want this abuse to end. So we're campaigning at the European level for a directive in this regard.
Yes, okay. Nothing else, I guess, from Jessica or from Laura? Yes.
No, just a big thank you.
So as I say, a big thank you to you, both
Thank
of
you
them.
very much.
And of course, if one day after COVID-19 you come to the Netherlands, so we'll be very happy, of course, to welcome you in person. And because I've seen that you have studied a bit in Amsterdam, so voilà. Yes. So thank you again.
No problem.
And
have a good evening.
you too. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Right, thank you everyone for watching, and apologies for these technical inconveniences, but we managed to get through it.
Yes, so thank you very much. Thank you, Laura. Have a good end of your internship. Thank you as well, Jessica in Malta, that we hope to visit you very soon as well. And yes, so it was great to have this interview.